Just a glimpse into what the president said to first responders behind closed doors during his visit to a hospital in the town that was in mourning. While 22 families began to plan funerals and wounded survivors still were lying in their hospital beds, the president of the United States said this to a room of emergency workers.
I was here 3 months ago. We made a speech and we had a what was the name of the arena? That place was packed, right?
I was front row.
Right? The judge is a respected
I was front
guy.
row.
What was the name?
I was front row in there.
He was in the front
good.
row.
Come here, man. That was some crowd.
Thank you for
And we had twice the number outside. And then you had this crazy Beto. Beto had like 400 people in a parking lot. They said his crowd was wonderful.
You heard him, and just think, young men, women, children were trying to heal in hospital beds, feet away from him, and he wanted to talk about himself and the crowd size at one of his rallies. Monday, when the president addressed the nation, reeling off the deadly weekend, in a prepared teleprompter speech, he called for political unity. But in the past 4 days, the president has attacked or insulted at least a dozen people or groups, either using Twitter or a microphone. And in the hours between hospital visits in Dayton, Ohio and El Paso, Texas, he couldn't stop himself from launching insults at 35,000 feet up using Twitter against the former vice president, ripping media coverage and turning the attention back to himself. So let's start there with CNN's Caitlin Collins, who is live at the White House. And you have some new reporting about how Trump aides are viewing the visit.
Yeah, Brooke, you'll remember yesterday we saw several of the president's aides come out defending his demeanor during those trips where we were in Dayton, Ohio, but also in El Paso, Texas, saying that local officials were mischaracterizing what happened behind closed doors when cameras were not in there, because the White House said they weren't going to let reporters into the hospitals while the president was visiting with those patients and their medical staff. But now we're learning that behind the scenes, not everyone back here at the White House thinks that visit was as successful as they were claiming publicly that it was. They're conceding that the president's behavior was not exactly what they were hoping for when the president was trying to strike this tone of being this consoler in chief yesterday. They thought he spent too much time lashing out at those local officials after he left Ohio and was on his way to Texas. And of course, the president was fuming not just about the coverage of that trip, but also at his own aides, because they didn't let the cameras into the hospitals where the president was visiting with those patients and medical staff, which we saw a little bit of that on that video where he's talking about crowd sizes. But the president wanted the reporters and their cameras in the room. Now, officials defended not letting them come in as because it's out of respect for the patients in that hospital. But the president was saying he didn't feel like he was getting enough coverage or enough credit for his trip there and for his response. So what we're being told is that essentially the president spent that plane ride back from El Paso, Texas, here to Washington last night, fuming about the response to that trip. But behind the scenes, his aides do not think from the administration's viewpoint that it was a successful trip at all.
I want to bring in our colleague, Ed Lavandera. He's in El Paso again today. And Ed, you were there yesterday. You were in the thick of it, as the president was there and was visiting with, victims and first responders. What's your response to hearing now from Caitlin that the Trump aides maybe think that the visit wasn't so well received?
Well, we had a sense that it was going to be an awkward, tense visit on some levels. We've heard like a mixed bag from victims and family members that we have been speaking with in the days leading up to the visit. Remember, all of these patients are being cared for at 2 different hospitals. The president only visited one of the hospitals, and there was kind of a mixed bag. I spoke with 2 men who were survivors. They had rushed to the scene to help rescue members of that youth soccer team, those children that were hiding under a car in the parking lot. They told me that they welcomed the president's visit, that they hoped that by speaking to them, that they would have a message of unity for the president and for people seeing that. But we also heard from a number of others who said that they refused to meet with the president. The family of Michelle Grady, the 33-year-old woman who was just outside of the entrance to the Walmart, who was shot and wounded 3 times. She is undergoing a 4 or 5 hour surgery today. Her family told us that they had no interest in meeting with the president, and we've heard that from several other people as well. So clearly not everybody inside that hospital was anxious to get FaceTime with the president yesterday.
I just want to back to his behavior, Caitlin, it's just wrong. And if we don't call it out, his behavior is normalized, right? So in addition to an insult-filled week after calling for unity, what was that, Monday afternoon, he brings up crowd size at the hospital.
Yeah, something that wasn't much of a surprise to people who know the president well or pay attention to his past remarks, because that's often something the president talks about. And when he thinks of El Paso, he associates it with that February rally, the rally I was at, where, of course, the big story of that day was this showdown between the president and Beto O'Rourke. So that is what is on his mind when he's going to El Paso. That's what he associates El Paso with, along with that argument for the border wall. So it's something he brought up. In that video, you can't tell what exactly the response is, because then the president starts talking about taking videos and photos with the people that he's speaking with at that hospital. But of course, this is a question about why the president is mentioning crowd sizes while he's visiting with these two cities who are still in mourning, of course. And certainly, as Ed is noting, there were people there that were happy to see the president. But as we saw in Dayton, Ohio, just in front of that bar where those 9 people were gunned down over the weekend, there were people who also did not want the president there, in addition to his supporters going back and forth. And that was kind of a big takeaway for the day, because typically after a mass shooting, you're not seeing this kind of controversy over the president's visit. But that is something you saw very much on the streets of Dayton and in El Paso, where there were people who did not want the president there, along with people who thought it was just fine for the commander-in-chief to come.
I was talking to Tara Setmare last hour, and she was telling me the story about, during the wars overseas with President Bush, Ed, President George W. Bush was at Walter Reed, and he ran into, he was, speaking with a soldier who was, pretty badly injured. And there was a mother who was really angry at the president, right? And according to this story, President Bush stood there and he took it. He let this mother just, she lit into him. And then when they were boarding, it was Dana Perino's story. And when they were boarding back on Air Force One, he said to Dana, essentially, wow, that mama was really mad at me, right? But this point of the story was that was a president, and you can think of several on both sides of the aisle, right, who knew something, god awful had happened to whether it's a soldier or a child in El Paso, and he took it. He took it. He didn't insult others or brag about crowd size. Ed.
Well, and really when you consider the scene inside of that hospital, this is just 4 days after this massacre, where you've had emergency teams working around the clock, people literally hanging on and fighting for their lives. There is one man who is going through extensive surgeries, still in critical condition. The family of Michelle Grady that I told you about, she's undergoing a 4 to 5 hour surgery today. These are doctors and medical professionals who are taking this very personally. They say that they don't want to lose any more, so they are in the care of these hospital professionals. They are doing whatever they can to make that. That is what is first and foremost on their minds. And you're also walking in to a situation that is incredibly raw. I mean, these are people who with extensive, gruesome wounds. In some cases, they're sedated. They are in medically induced comas, whatever the case might be. These are people and families that are watching their loved ones hang on for their dear lives.